Present the conference. Modeling Markets. The material of conference was organized by the engineer Jesus Velasquez Bermudez, Ph.D. The physical world and the economic world. In every real system there are two strongly related visions, the physical and the economic. The interrelationship is so strong that mathematically it is totally defined independently of our understanding. In optimization models, the formulation of the primal model of a system corresponds to our economic interpretation of the physical world. The associated dual model corresponds to the implicit view of the economic world. Central planning and the market economy pursue the same goal: the lowest economic cost to provide the service. The main features of physical world are primal vision, known, mathematical models, laboratories, quick reaction, rapid recovery, controllable, manifestation, activity levels, control, centrally planned systems. The main features of economic world are dual vision, little known, mental models, no laboratories, slow reaction, slow recovery, not very controllable, manifestation, value of resource, control, open markets. The view that prevails in both worlds is different and is associated with the mathematical problems that are solved. The primal vision minimizes the production costs of physical activities. On the other hand, the dual vision maximizes the value of the producer's resources, that is, his wealth. According to the duality theory, the two positions give the same results. Optimization, economic analysis and duality theory. Studies on the equilibrium of markets go back many years. Robert Dorfman, Paul Samuelson, and Robert Solow are best known as the co-authors of the landmark 1958 book, Linear Programming and Economic Analysis, commissioned by the Rand Corporation. This text was the first comprehensive treatment to bridge the gap between standard economic theory and the post-war developments in linear programming. It is considered a classic in mathematical economics for integrating traditional theory. It connected linear programming to classic theories of the firm and general equilibrium. Game theory. It explored interrelations between von Neumann's theory of games and linear programming. Input-output analysis. The book provided a rigorous mathematical foundation for Leontief's input-output models. Samuelson and Solow were awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. Economic Theory of Markets, Antoine-Augustin Cournot. One of the best-known works is the one published by Cournot in 1838 in his book Recherches sur les principes mathématiques de la théorie des richesses, in which he constructs a theory of oligopolistic agents that includes monopoly and perfect competition as extreme limits. Oligopolistic Economic Equilibrium, Heinrich Freiherr von Stackelberg. The work published by Stackelberg in 1934, in which he studies the equilibrium conditions of monopolies and oligopolies with dominant agents, as is the case of the electricity sector, is very important. The economists learned to think systematically about the adoption of rational measures in decision-making processes, and it became natural to think about the application of that rationality to social problems other than the production and distribution of products. But applying this rationality in more general areas, without the traditional structures of a market, also required a more general approach. The search for such a structure was undertaken in 1928 by John von Neumann with the development of the basic principles of the so-called game theory, which was concretized with the publication, together with Oscar Morgenstern, of the book Game Theory and Economic Behavior in 1944. During this period, it is worth mentioning Wald's work published in 1935 and 1936, which provides, for the first time, evidence of different qualitative characteristics of equilibrium. Competitive Economic Equilibrium, John Nash. In the 50s, the new era of equilibrium studies began with Nobel laureate John Nash's first work on the theory of non-cooperative equilibrium, which can be considered one of the most important intellectual advances of the last century, due to its great impact on the economic sciences and, in general, on the social sciences. To understand the importance of Nash's work, we must begin with the definition of economics itself. A generation before Nash, economics was defined as a social science specializing in the study of the production and distribution of goods and services. By this definition, Nash's work could be considered mathematical research beyond the boundaries of economics. Today, Economists define their field of action more broadly, as a science related to the analysis of the incentives that move all social institutions. Nash's contribution played a central role in redefining the scope of the economy. Carnot's work can be considered a precursor to Nash's work, and for this reason the Nash-Carnot equilibrium is often discussed, but the reality is that Carnot did not attempt to articulate any theory about equilibrium. Nash's theory, based on the maximization of the utility functions of each agent, is simply the mathematical formalization of the ideas that Machiavelli had qualitatively proposed, in 1513 through his famous book The Prince, about non-cooperative games. One of the fundamental relationships between optimization and economics corresponds to the concept of market equilibrium, which is achieved from the understanding that in a rational market all agents will try to optimize the achievement of an objective, usually maximizing its benefits, which each agent achieves through an optimization model. The joint solution of market equilibrium is achieved when all agents obtain positions in which they optimize their objective, considering that the other agents do the same. This comprehensive model can be called the market equilibrium model. To understand the mathematical behavior of equilibrium models, it is necessary to start from the understanding of optimization models, since from a rational point of view, not necessarily economic, any agent acting in a system will try to do it in the best way according to the principles that determine the objective of its existence, which means optimizing their behavior according to their performance measure. The solution to the equilibrium problem will be found at the points where the mathematical conditions that determine the optimization of the performance measure of each of the agents are met, considering the effects that the decisions of each agent have on the other agents. Based on the above, the study of the mathematical conditions of equilibrium models begins by studying the mathematical conditions of optimization problems, and from there it extends to other mathematical problems that are also appropriate for studying and solving the equilibrium problem of systems of any kind. The following types, formats, of problems should be considered. Nonlinear programming problem. Nonlinear complementarity problem. Variational inequality problem. Mathematical problems with equilibrium constraints, and fixed point problem. It is important to note that none of the alternatives is the best, and that they are complementary and, in some cases, appropriate or difficult to implement. All science as it grows toward perfection becomes mathematical in its ideas. Alfred Whitehead. Fundamentals of Optimization and Economics. The video. Fundamentals of Optimization and Economics. It complements this lecture. Market modeling. Rational competitive agents maximize their income while respecting social laws and the market laws. In the world of supply and demand, three definitions should not be forgotten: similar but never the same. Value, it is set by the buyer, so what the goods mean to him. Two different buyers typically have different appreciations of value. Cost, it is set by the producer depending on his production technology. Two different producers usually have different costs. Price, it is a measure of the economy that depends on the market average. Depending on the type of good, it can be free or regulated. Aggregate modeling is based on aggregate price valuation. When facing the markets there are two positions: cooperation and competition. The two positions can be studied following the game theory, but the calculation processes are very different. The Nobel Prize winner Lloyd Shapley excels in cooperative game theory, and John Nash excels in competitive game theory. This conference is about competitive markets, and the Nobel Prize winner John Nash excels in competitive game theory. This conference is about competitive markets. The following is a conceptual analysis of the differences in modeling between cooperation and competition in markets. In cooperation, the problem is to collectively minimize costs to meet demand. The agents agree to form a coalition that benefits everyone. The restrictions are those of the market. Availability of raw materials. Meeting demand. Capacity in industrial facilities. Regulation, and others. This implies that there will be an optimization model for the selected coalition, but the mathematical problem focuses on building coalitions. That requires solving a lot of optimization problems. In the case of competition or non-cooperation, The first major difference is that the objective is to maximize the profits obtained in the market by each agent, acting individually. This implies that there will be as many optimization models as there are agents in the market. The restrictions are those of the market. As the market is dynamic, it is assumed that each agent acts knowing the position of the others, which means that each of them, when solving their problem, must consider the mathematical problem that the others solve. This involves introducing equilibrium constraints between agents. To solve the problem of competitive market modeling, there are multiple alternatives. Karush-Kuhn-Tucker, KKT, Nonlinear Complementary Problem, NCP, Variational Inequations, VI, Mathematical Programming with Equilibrium Constraints, PEC, Multi-Level Optimization, and Model Coordination. Considering economic theory, the equilibrium point maximizes the social surplus and is the meeting point of the functions of supply and demand. The image is present in a simple way: the equilibrium of a market. If the market is perfect, the equilibrium point is where the social surplus is maximized, which is equal to the sum of the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. The way in which the social surplus is divided depends on the form of the functions involved. Considering nonlinear functions, the price-quantity scheme is illustrated, which maximizes the social surplus, producer plus consumer. Imperfect markets imply that there is a dominant position of the producer, or the consumer. In imperfect markets, the only solution is to reduce the break-even point in quantity, as agents are not willing to produce at a loss. Mainly the producers. This implies a loss of social surplus, which must imply a loss of wealth for society. The new position involves quantity reduction and a range for price. The selection of price will be made according to the characteristics and type of market agents. Modeling competitive markets. The study of the market equilibrium problem begins in the partial equilibrium theory, which studies the mechanisms that determine the equilibrium quantity and price in a market, whose core is the analysis of the elasticities of supply and demand, principles that are due to the work of Alfred Marshall. General equilibrium theory studies the conditions necessary for multiple markets to be simultaneously in equilibrium. The original formulation is due to Léon Walras, who maintains that all goods are complementary to others or can be substituted by others, to a greater or lesser extent. Because of this interdependence, any shift in the equilibrium point of the market for one good will cause changes in the markets for other goods, in the markets for other goods, and so on. These price variations, in turn, produce a retroactive effect, feedback, on the original market. Finally, if there is no external interference to hinder it, this process, which Walras called tâtonnement, will lead to equilibrium in all markets for goods, services, and productive factors. The type of markets can be classified into perfect or ideal, all agents compete on equal terms, seeking commonwealth; competitive, agents compete, all being equal; monopoly, a dominant producing agent that controls all supply; monopsony, a dominant consumer agent that controls all demand; oligopoly, a set of dominant producing agents that control supply and act as price makers; oligopsony, a set of dominant consumer agents that control demand and act as price makers; and regulated, controlled by a central controller, usually a government agency. In a perfect market, all agents are price takers. In an imperfect market there are two types of agents, price makers, and price takers. Game theory is a way of solving the problem of market equilibrium. The most well-known market models related to game theory are Nash-Carnot, and Stackelberg. Imperfect market equilibrium involves the reduction of quantity and a range for price, which will be captured by the dominant market agents. In the producer-dominated market, from the mathematical point of view, the equilibrium point is the one that solves the problem of maximizing the surplus of the dominant producer. In producer-controlled markets, the producer captures the price range, setting it as high as possible and thus minimizing consumer surplus. The producer must make decisions maximizing the surplus it can capture. In consumer-controlled markets, the consumer captures the price range, setting it as low as possible, and thus minimizing the producer's surplus. The consumer must make decisions maximizing the surplus it can capture. The consumer must make decisions maximizing the surplus it can capture. Broadly speaking, there are two types of technologies for determining supply and demand functions, based on statistical models, and techno-economic models that represent the process of consumption and production of goods and/or services. Nowadays, all the technologies that come from neural networks have been incorporated. Statistical inference models are built based on history and therefore try to project future situations based on situations experienced in the past. This is a great limitation for models that try to analyze a market under new scenarios. Techno-economic models integrate the effects due to the topology, technology and cost formation structure that affects the system. This allows determining the behavior of the system in situations that have never been faced before, since the relationship between all the entities integrated in the market is structured based on mathematical formulas that describe the processes. Vasily Leontief's mathematical model, known as input-output (I/O) analysis, is a quantitative framework used to represent the interdependencies between different sectors of an economy. Developed in the 1930s, it allows economists to determine how changes in one sector ripple through the entire production chain. The study of intersectoral relations is not a recent aspect of economic thought. In the 18th century, François Quesnay saw the need for an integrated system of national accounts that would serve as an instrument to reveal the behavior of the economic activity of a country or a given region. However, this idea did not have a significant impact for a long time, and it was not until the last century, with the pioneering work of Leontief, that the concept was systematized, giving rise to I/O tables. From this structure, Leontief was able to identify the industrial interdependence of the American economy, thus facilitating the development of a mathematical model within which all economic linkages were established and statistically estimated. Leontief's mathematical model was initially formulated in a static context and later adapted to a dynamic form by Leontief and others, in 1966. A static input-output model is based on the construction of a system of equations that represents the structure of the economy in terms of the sale and purchase of goods or services, commodities, of each sector with respect to all other sectors. Imperfect market equilibrium implies the existence of dominant agents who, by decreasing the quantity, achieve gains in pricing. Luis Augusto Barroso, at the conference. Bid-based dispatch in large-scale hydrosystems. Presents the results of a case of market power in the management of hydroelectric resources. The case presented compares two positions represented in two mathematical models. Minimum cost simulation, black line, which represents a perfect market, and Nash-Carnot simulation, red line, which represents a market with at least one dominant agent, which is of the hydraulic type. The graph shows energy production with the two models. The reduction due to the exercise of dominant power is evident. The chart shows spot prices. It is evident that the exercise of dominant power drives up the spot price. The flat feature of the spot price of the perfect market is a clearly known mathematical feature. Inelastic demand models. Inelastic demand occurs when the quantity demanded of a good or service varies very little in response to changes in its price. In that scenario, consumers continue to buy almost the same amount, even if the price rises significantly, usually because the product is a necessity or has no close substitutes. Common examples are vital medications, such as insulin, patients need it regardless of cost. Services, water, electricity and gas. Fuel, gasoline in the short term, as people need to go to work. Addictive products, such as tobacco or alcohol. The graph presents the diagram of an inelastic demand. Since demand is independent of price, equilibrium only depends on the producer's model, which could drive the price to infinity. The situation changes if there are several producing agents competing for the market. In this case, the price is set by the competition, but there is no response from the demand. It is normal to determine income by maximizing the producer's surplus. An alternative is to determine revenue by minimizing the cost of production. The diagram presents the production cost function, which corresponds to the integral under the supply function. MARCAL, an acronym for market allocation, is a mathematical optimization model used for long-term energy system analysis. Developed by the International Energy Agency, IEA, under the Energy Technology Systems Analysis Program, ETSP, it helps policymakers evaluate the impacts of different energy, economic, and environmental scenarios. MARCAL simulates the energy supply chain. Its structure is: primary producers extract raw materials from primary sources of energy, SRCs. Power processors produce secondary power or final power by multiple transformation technologies, CONs, or processes, PRCs. The various forms of energy are used in the different demanding sectors, DMD, to meet final demands for useful energy, DM. MARCAL is an example of a model that is used with assumptions of inelastic demand. Optimization, economic analysis and duality theory. Dorfman, Samuelson, and Solow stated, linear programming is, so to speak, a centralized system of calculation for finding efficient schemes or even for exploring the entire efficient whole. Competitive profit maximization, on the other hand, is a decentralized, atomistic way of doing the same thing. The image presents the structure of an equilibrium model of an agent in the electricity sector. The fundamental equation is that production equals demand. Production is equal to hydro generation plus thermal generation plus rationing, and the price corresponds to the dual variable of the demand equation. When industrial technological models assume known and inelastic demand, the problem is concentrated in the model that the agent selects to choose the price. It can solve the dual problem, or the primal problem, which will give the same results. Next, we'll focus on this example. The traditional thing is to use a primal formulation, from the physical point of view, to face the problem. The direct formulation of the dual problem is very complicated, due to the complexity of economic relations. The traditional primal formulation, for a linear case. The results of the primal problem are physical variables, and those of the dual problem are economic variables. The primal problem represents the physical world, and the dual one represents the economic world. The union of the two problems represents the relationship between the problems of resource valuation and resource allocation. This relationship is stronger than one might imagine. Moreover, the two problems are mathematically identical. Moreover, when the economic interpretation of the physical world is not adequate, it is not possible to obtain an associated economic world. The primal problem minimizes production costs. The dual maximizes the value of the producer's resources. The primal problem is more oriented to support decisions in the short and medium term, and the dual to support decisions in the medium and long term. The primal and dual formulations of a linear primal problem are presented. The modeling alternatives are the demand represented by a known function of inverse demand, estimated from historical data, an unknown function of inverse demand, modeled from equilibrium models between agents. In this case, the supply function is based on linear production system, resulting in a staggered supply curve. The demand function is based on an econometric model. This approach has been widely used. The problem to be solved is to maximize the social surplus, represented by the striped area. The image of a model of the European gas system highlights the demand side. The complement is the supply side. Modeling equilibrium between agent models. In the case of proactive demand, an alternative is to formulate three models that interact with each other and simulate the economic process of a dynamic market. These modes are the supply model that represents producers, the demand model that represents consumers, and the pricing model that explains how costs are converted into prices. The pricing model should include taxes and the markup policy of producers. The cycle is: the results of the demand model affect the producer model, which produces the costs that will be converted into prices. that affect the demand model. The image presents the structure of the production and the demand models, assuming that they are linear. The integrated model converges when supply equals demand. The goal of both models is to minimize the costs of each agent. Alternatively, the supply model can be substituted by maximizing the profit of producers. Based on Lagrange theory, the models can be replaced by Karush-Kuhn-Tucker conditions and solved as a single model of the type mathematical programming with equilibrium constraints, PEC. The image is present in a simple way the equilibrium of a market. If the market is perfect, the equilibrium point is where the social surplus is maximized, which is equal to the sum of the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. The way in which the social surplus is divided depends on the form of the functions involved. Demand function segmentation. Modern digital marketplaces are virtual environments where buyers and sellers use internet technologies to transact and exchange information. These markets are defined by high concentration, where a few companies dominate global activity, and by rapid changes in the interaction of agents, driven by artificial intelligence. The dominant market types are e-commerce and marketplaces. Platforms like Amazon and Alibaba dominate general retail, while niche sites focus on specialized goods. Digital services, marketplaces, subscription-based contents like Netflix and media markets. Social commerce, the integration of shopping directly into social networks like TikTok and Instagram. Electricity markets, specialized market where prices change online. These cases are the result of technological growth and did not exist before. If demand is not segmented, the producer's surplus will be limited to a market defined by a price. If demand is segmented, trying to adjust prices to the market value curve, the producer will increase his surplus, thanks to better management of demand groups. In this case, the demand is divided into 4 segments, determining a price per segment that adjusts to its value. Revenue management is a price optimization app that used to work offline, now works online, but its principles have not changed. Revenue management is a broad topic used to describe decision-making processes that involve understanding demand behavior to maximize revenue. It involves making most use of limited inventories and limited capacities of perishable resources under random demand based on an accurate analysis of the subtle economics of pricing, and precise interpretation of market conditions and trends to support decisions. The key to revenue management is to break down demand into segments, as small as possible, hopefully one per consumer, and set prices for each segment. On the left side, the producer has a segment and a price for the market, and a maximum profit of $2,500. If the demand is divided into 4 segments, the producer has 4 prices, and the maximum profit would be $4,000. Current technology makes it possible to atomize the market by measuring it online. Remember, all science as it grows toward perfection becomes mathematical in its ideas. Alfred Whitehead. Thank you very much for your attention.